This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. I'm back in Ohio for this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. It's a funny circumstance. I've now been to Ohio twice in the last 6 weeks on two separate trips, but this one is actually, long story short, so I'm in for Cincinnati, flew into Cincinnati yesterday, but a couple weeks ago while talking to Matt Cole from Fatheads for a Pick Six story in our Best in Beer issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Matt mentions this little brewery, this little farm brewery out in the countryside of Ohio called Woolly Pig. And I was like, okay, yeah, but they raise pigs out here. And we started looking into it. He's like, their Zwickel beer is one of his favorite beers. And he put it in his Dream Six Pack. And so 2 weeks later, here I am sitting at the farm at Woolly Pig. What's the name of this town, Kevin?
Well, it's Fresno, Ohio.
Yeah.
Right, not California. And it's more of a zip code. It's about 100 square miles.
Is it Coshocton that we're close to?
We're in the county of Coshocton.
Okay.
And we're about 10 miles from the city of Coshocton. The whole county is about 33,000 people. So,
well, this is Kevin Ely, co-founder and brewmaster of Woolly Pig. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about Woolly Pig and beer.
Well, and the funny thing was we started doing some background research into this, realized that you were brewmaster of Uinta out in Salt Lake City for a number of years before coming back to this area where your wife is from and buying this farm from a family friend, raising these woolly pigs that you encountered on a trip in Bavaria. And now you've got this brewery making German-style beers out here on a farm. In a very interesting model that feels very European at its roots, and naturally that just gives us all the feels. And so here we are. That made it worth driving all the way out here, going from Cincinnati yesterday, and going to go see some friends in Columbus along the way and make a whole thing out of this now. But I figured while I'm out here on the farm, we should talk about Woolly Pig. We're going to do that. We're going to definitely talk about lager brewing because you've got a lot of lager tanks in there. Lagers are a big focus of what you do, and that's kind of how you build this German style approach to beer right here on the farm.
It's pretty much all we do is lagers. So
perfect. And you've got some points of view about that work on this small system. We can talk about this interesting 3-vessel, 5-barrel system that you brew on and how that works with this matrix of small horizontal tanks and your cold box and everything else. But all of these approaches that you take to making lager in a small way, but at a very high quality. Before we do that, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take my word for it.
This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5-barrel pub system up to our production brewery, we've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high-quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it.
That's right. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is excited to now offer 2 to 4 week lead times on all in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers and seamers. These models are available in 100 to 300 can per minute filling speeds and are built with a focus on scalability and low dissolved oxygen pickup. This special lead time is only while supplies last, so send them an email at contactus@probrew.com or call them at 262-278-4945. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, Old Orchard has supplied flavored craft juice concentrate blends to over 46 states for the production of fruit-forward beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, and more. By partnering with some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape, Old Orchard has become a go-to source of fruit-forward ingredients. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Okay, Kevin, we normally kick off with some history. You've actually got a pretty long one that goes back to UC Davis, 1999. You've been brewing for a while out there, and it took you through now back to doing your own thing here in Woolly Pig. Kind of, trace that arc for us.
Yeah, I guess in the way back, I was a student at UC Davis in the mid-90s. I was there to study nutritional biochemistry. And I was trying to get through the prereqs as fast as possible because I really wanted to take nutritional biochem, like the core course, which had like year of chem, year of OChem, year of biochem before you could even take the class. And so I was taking classes concurrently and out of order, like OChem 2 before or 3 before 2, and then biochem concurrently so I could take it my junior year. And so in doing this, I stumbled across like some weird textbook that had a lot of fermentation stuff discussed in it, and I was kind of interested. So I realized I could just take those classes as a student at UC Davis. And had a lot of flexibility in my major, so I filled that with all the food processing, engineering, and brewing science classes. And Michael J. Lewis was teaching a lot of those classes at the time. And so I took malting and brewing science and all sorts of industrial microbiology, things like that. And and I also did a brewing apprenticeship. My first brewing apprenticeship was an academic apprenticeship at Ska Brewing in Durango in summer of '98. It's kind of funny because I went out there with my truck and my bike and my kayak and crashed my truck. And so I had my bike, and so I wasn't living in my truck, but instead I lived in the brewery because my truck was in the shop all summer. And they let me live in the attic and sometimes in the office on the couch. And they're great guys out there. And anyhow, and I had a pager. Oh my gosh, I had a pager. And I made money because I wasn't getting paid as an intern there because it was academic. And so I was pushing rubber on the Animas River, do 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour trips. And so I could leave the brewery pretty flexibly because I was unpaid. And so I'd just be doing things around the brewery, and I'd get a page, and I'd hop on my bike and ride over and hop on the bus and push some rubber raft down the river for an hour and then come back and brew. So that was my brewing apprenticeship.
Whitewater guide.
In '98, yeah, and that's what I was doing at Davis, was a whitewater guide for my most of my work out there. So anyhow, that's the early days. Pagers, that's hilarious. So from there, graduated in '99, moved out to Salt Lake City, brewed at some small breweries out there, and then also worked my way back to Berkeley, and I was brewing at the production facility for Pyramid in Berkeley off Gilman, and did that for a little bit, and then moved back to Salt Lake City and brewed at Uinta for a little bit, and then left Uinta and went for the small brew pub Hoppers that I'd brewed at actually earlier. And then I went from there back to Uinta in 2007, and I was there for about a decade as the brewmaster. Yeah, and then now we're at the modern era in my world, I guess. Sure. So, I remember that era of Uinta. I mean, I would, I think we could even get. I can't remember. I could get those in New York in that era. But when we moved out to Colorado in 2010, we could absolutely get those Uinta beers. Oh, for sure.
So,
yeah.
Those things like
Colorado was an important market for Uinta at that time.
For sure, definitely. Sure. Baba Black Lager.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite beers that we developed.
The birthday barley wine.
Yeah,
that might have been pre-hop nosh. I'm not sure exactly.
Oh, those are both. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember. I don't need to go into the details of the hop nosh story, but yeah, it was during the hop shortage of 2009, I want to say.
Okay.
And one of the few hops I could get was Galaxy. No one was using them then, so ended up being like, well, I can get Galaxy and Chinook, and let's see if we can make an IPA. And I started realizing it was really good, and so we were like, oh, we'll do 700 barrels of hop notch. At the time it was notch, and now it's nosh. IPA, and then we kind of secretly, not letting ownership know that we needed more of these hops, so we kept secretly contracting a lot of Galaxy early, and so we actually had enough to be contracted enough so that within about 2 years we were doing about 20,000 barrels of hop notch, and so I was glad that we had done that because it allowed a lot of things to happen if we hadn't kind of deviated from what we were supposed to be doing. We otherwise wouldn't have been able to make a lot of hop notch. So, yeah.
Well, there you go. All it took was a lot of Galaxy contracts.
Yeah.
So then you felt some pull to leave that nice senior position at Uinta and come out here and open a farm brewery in rural Ohio.
Yeah, things for me were very hands-on at Uinta. I did a lot of maintenance. I did a lot of helped with a lot of design and installation and commissioning and optimization and all that business, which was all super fun. Helped manage maintenance and as well as quality assurance and such. But it was sold from the original founding owners and bought by private equity, which I was really excited for. That was great, and it was good. And we had a new CEO
for a while.
For a while, and then it just
don't get me talking about private equity. In the media side, I have worked for at least 5 or 6 different private equity backed companies, and I have my strong opinions about it. In fact, we started our media business so that my partner John and I would never have to work for private equity again.
There you go. So it was one of those things. It it got, and then it really did.
I'm saying it so you don't have to say it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It was time to move on. And so the question was, what's that next chapter going to be? We had recently just acquired this farm. We actually bought the farm here before we had any plans of building a brewery here. We just weren't sure how that was all going to factor in. Part of it was like the private equity timeline. You're like, well, this is going to be limited. It's in 5, 6, 7 years. I don't know what's going to happen after that.
Right.
And so we were kind of planning a long-term exit strategy, which, it sounds weird to say that, but so my wife and I, she finished her PhD and her postdoc in biology at the University of Utah and had been offered a professorship at University of Wyoming at their satellite campus in Cody. And we were about to move there, and we decided, you know what, we're just going to move our 2 young children who were less than a year old and about 3 years old out to the grandparents in Coshocton County, Ohio, where it's beautiful, and we had this opportunity to buy this farm a year before that, and so we said, let's just make it happen. And so we came out and started developing this property, which took a little bit of work, and then also went on from there to develop the business, and I can talk more about that. But
sure. So, what's the pig connection?
The pig connection. So. These pigs,
because you have pigs here on the farm, and the woolly pigs do play a role in the overall thing. It's almost like the Jester King goats,
Sure,
you've got your livestock here that are pretty cute and attractive, and are a draw here for the brewery now.
Yeah, goats would be a second to me for pigs, as far as for what we're trying to have them do for us. So, the pigs are functional and also really cool. And they're also, it's a big part of our sustainability. That's a huge part of our focus here. I'm actually on the Ohio Craft Brewers Association Sustainability Committee. I give usually a presentation every other year or so at the annual conference for Ohio craft brewers. And it's a big part of what we do. And the pigs help us achieve a lot of that on this remote location. We have no municipal water treatment, no PTOW, nothing to really do that. And we actually supply our own water on the farm as well. So we have to really manage that all very, very closely. And the pigs are a big part of that. You go back, so the pigs, when I first saw this breed of pig, which is often called Mangalitsa, it has a couple other names. If you're going to talk to someone from Hungary or such, they have slightly different pronunciations of it. But this is a breed that was I saw on a trip when I was riding bikes through the Fränkische Schweiz in Franconia in northern Bavaria, and I was just outside. I think I was southeast of Bamberg, and in an area, and just happened to see these pigs. And it was actually this time of year because it was just before it was early mid-November, just before the Brau Beviala and the European Beer Star Awards, and we were filling some time visiting breweries via bike. And there was a lot of breweries in that area. And the Fränkische Schweiz at that time, I think, had about 100 breweries. Not that we visited anywhere near that many, but along the way, you're driving through these bucolic farmlands that look like, just like here. It's you're surrounded by woods, kind of like a quilt work of forest, woods, pasture land, cropland. It's very hilly, and here we're in the Appalachian foothills. And they actually call this area Little Switzerland. And Fränkische Schweiz translates as Franconian Switzerland. So it's funny, when I came back with pictures in this area, my wife is like, it looks just like Coshocton. And I was like, cool. It kind of does. So on that trip, I just happened to see a sow with a bunch of piglets. The piglets are tiny, smaller than cat size, and they have little stripes and dots like baby fawn deer. And I took a couple pictures and got back, and then was able to realize that these were a pig species that were almost in the 90s, were almost gone. There was like fewer, I think only 90 to 100 of them in the world that they were aware of. And someone had brought them from Austria, Hungary area across Europe, and then into the UK, and then into the northeast of the US, and then across the US. And so I don't know, now there's maybe 10,000 or something, who knows? But they're a fun breed to raise, and they're pasture pigs, so they take lots of space, which is not efficient. There's a lot of pig farmers in our area, and so they're not going to hop on it, jump up and be excited about raising Mangalitsa, because it takes way too long to raise them to mature size, and it takes like way more feed and way more time, and they don't have enough babies, and they take lots of land, and you can't raise 5,000 pigs on 100 acres. You can only raise maybe 100 if you're trying hard.
These are side project pigs. These are not going to be your main business pigs.
No, but so these pigs also,
but they look cute.
Yeah, and then they're different. They, we sell the meat from them. It's part of our process on site, where I did see historically there were some breweries in that part of the world where they would have pig barns sometimes right next to or just across the street from these small breweries, and realized that that's part of the process of being able to process all, and I'm not talking about just the spent grain, but all of the organic waste that you're producing in the brewing process. So one of my favorite inventions is the buckets, and the buckets are important to us. We transport a lot. We side stream everything. So I can get into a lot of wastewater stuff now or later, but it's a big part of our
wastewater.
Yeah,
it's the sexiest brewing topic around.
It's one of my favorites. If we can, just cut out like 4 minutes for it.
We can definitely make some time to talk about that. But especially in this day and age, and especially in an environment like this, understanding that waste stream is what makes the entire piece of this possible. Not the sexiest of topics, but certainly a utilitarian one, and we will talk about that, I promise, before the end of it. But first, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. It's perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals. Their cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries, ensuring that your equipment stays clean and free of harmful bacteria and contaminants. From cleaning fermenters to kegs, they've got a solution for every step of the brewing process. Use 5-star chemicals today and taste the difference in your brews. Also, RSS Macklin, a family-owned company started by the head of seaming technology from PS Angeles and SME, and a field service technician for Ball Corp, offers audits and repairs for can seamers and can integrity training. With experience from big breweries, they bring valuable knowledge to craft businesses. They provide solutions for can damage, seam training, and help your facility become self-sufficient without relying on OEMs. If you have any questions regarding your machine setup parameters or concerns about your can line, call them at 330-299-8210 or email service@rssmacklin.com. That's rssmaclin.com. So, Kevin, you've got a real thing for lager, and this being a farm brewery, you're not making farmhouse ales. You're making, in that kind of the German tradition, making lager beer on a farm and engaging in that, but that has some interesting challenges, because making lager at a small scale is actually harder potentially than making lager at a slightly larger scale. And so you've explained to everybody the brew house that you designed and had built, and how the kind of mechanics behind the system you've built for making lager at a small scale.
For sure. Yeah. So, first off, kind of to incorporate sort of the overall ethos, kind of, or just theory and philosophy of what we're doing. All of our beers are unfiltered. They're all, and I do use some kettle findings, but I do not use findings in the beering, in the fermentation or aging processes at all. So lagering is a huge part of how we're trying to get our beers right. So all of our beers are technically Keller beer or it's Zwickel beer, be it if it's our Schwarz beer, if it's our Helles, or if it's our Pils, or if it's yada yada. I mean our Dunkel or anything. So. But so the brew house here it's small. It's a 5-barrel system. When I was at Uinta, we initially had a 40-barrel system that's mechanical, and then when the project's expanding up to 135-barrel, fully automated 5-vessel system with blocks of 500-barrel fermenters and 1,000-barrel fermenters, and clarification systems and centrifuge and all that stuff, right? So here, I learned a lot about brewing engineering and all of those experiences back then, and so I wanted to incorporate the components that I felt were beneficial and helpful. And so here, what I've got is we have a dual kettle 5-barrel system. So there's 2 multi-purpose kettles and a dedicated lauter ton. And I don't have a dedicated whirlpool. I just whirlpool in my kettle. So they're actually, I guess, serve 3 purposes. But so I started with a mill, and I've got a 4-roller mill.
And both of those have agitators in them.
Yes, that is correct. So, our whole process is we start with our mill, which is actually way oversized, but it's cool because it's got 4 rollers, and they're really nice because they're about 11 inches in diameter. So you get a nice angle of incidence at cracking that grain. So it's kind of like if you read your brewing theory books, right? In Kunzel or whatever, it's like, oh yeah, this is what we want. We want this size diameter of roller, but you don't really get that a lot in craft brewing in small sizes, and especially on our size. And so I was able to acquire a mill at a really good price that's compact and affordable and has 4 of these rollers. So I've got my initial rollers and my secondary rollers.
So they're big diameter, but they're actually
pretty narrow
width.
They're only about 100 millimeters or about 4 inches wide.
Yeah.
So, but the capacity for what I'm doing is still massive because it's like, it takes me like, I don't know, 8 or 9 minutes to mill. So I could be running.
And you're milling into a grist case that sits below that mill, but then gets there's no auger, there's no conveyance. It's you are manually moving that grist case and then hoisting it up above to then load that grain into
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I throw it on my back and move it or something, but I got my pallet jack and I roll it over between my electric boiler, steam generator, and my hot liquor tank on one side and my kettles on the other. It kind of squeezes in there, and I try not to bend any pipes. And then I got my hoist, my chain hoist, which is certified OSHA, everybody. So, and it lifts it, and then it's on a trolley.
I wasn't questioning you on
that. I'm just making sure it's not normal. And then it hangs between the 2 multi-purpose kettles. And so I can mash into either one. I was thinking I would be brewing a lot more beer at a much higher velocity because I was expecting I would have to distribute, not be all on site, but we've kind of become a destination and we were able to just produce and sell everything on site, which has been really helpful. But that means I'm only brewing about one and a half to 2 brews a week. And in that case, I just double batch for these brews. And so I hoist up and I basically have now dedicated my first kettle to mashing the first batch in. And then I go through step mashes because it's steam jacketed with agitators. And then I go from there and I have a mash pump and I transfer it into my lauter ton. And there I can do my wort collection from the lauter ton back to my second kettle. And then the second kettle, hold on one second. There's a tractor going by. That's our neighbor that we lease a few parcels to that's going to spread some that's goat and pig manure from he's right over there. Anyhow,
we are really truly on the farm.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Anyhow, so yeah, from there I then collect back into the second kettle and boil. And meanwhile, as soon as I'm able to empty out the lauter ton, I can then transfer this mash from then I can mash in my second. My second one's already mashed in, also into the first kettle. And then what I do is as soon as I'm done graining out and rinsing the lauter ton and preloading it with water, then I then transfer the next mash into the lauter tun, and then it actually goes back, instead of into kettle 2, it goes back to kettle 1, and then I can have all things going, and then one's boiling, and then when that's done boiling, I flip on my agitator a little more, and then I get my whirlpool, and then cooling, and then deceller, and blah blah blah. Yeah, stuff. But in that whole process, there's a lot of process piping on a small scale that's pretty compact, and there's a big diversion panel. It's not big, I mean, depends what you're talking about, but big for a brewery our size. We do 600 barrels a year, pretty much, pretty consistently, and yeah, it allows us to move quickly, so our beer's not. The beer the wort process is not sitting around. It's
right.
It's that's something I don't really like about some simpler processes, is that a lot of that stuff is a little stagnant, but we're able to mash in every 2 hours on this process, and that allows us to keep things moving. So if I wanted to, I mean, I could knock out 4 brews, 5 brews in a 14 to 16 hour period, but in this case we're doing 2 brews in about an 8.5 hour period. So it takes about the same amount of time as if we had a traditional 2-vessel 10-barrel system.
Right.
So, this double batching into our 10-barrel fermenters works well. It also, I like the double batching because it's like gives you some flexibility. If things are changed a little bit, and you're like, oh, my extraction wasn't as good as I wanted, or a little bit more, you can.
Right.
I kind of like the mold, and also it's quick. So it's not like it's 4 hours till the next batch is coming in. It's 2 hours. It pumps into the fermenter, and then 2 hours later we got the second one coming in. And I think that's good.
And gentle is a word you used a lot when we were touring earlier, that from being gentle with your milled grain to being gentle in the way that you boil, so that you're not hurting the beer the wort that you're making there. That's also a focus for you.
Yeah, that's a lot of why the grist moves the way it does. Is it doesn't go. Augering does do things, and chain disc and cable lays and stuff do a great job. But even better is not doing that. So, so I'm able to do it on the scale.
It works.
Yeah, it works. Sure. It's fine. It's not a big deal. So, and I think that's great. And I think that keeps our husk in great shape, and does wonderful things for the beer. But then also, I was talking about our kettles. We have they're steam jacketed vessels, but and with agitators. And the thing is like especially when we're boiling our wort, we're able to keep those agitators running at a very low velocity that really allows me to reduce the amount of steam that I'm applying to it, because my heat exchanging is happening so efficiently. And so
there's no stratification. It's just it's nicely homogenized,
and so the heat, and also you're getting less browning or scorching, if you will, and less thermal stress on the wort that's going to be right up against that steam jacket inside the kettle. And what steam's nice too, because the temperature differential is pretty low. I mean, we're at like 225 to 30-ish degrees Fahrenheit, because we're low pressure steam, and so that's great. But now it's like, if I can like keep the wort moving across it nicely. I mean, when you do have thermosiphoning, right, in certain capacities, and thermal movements and currents that are convective currents that are going to keep that going. But this even goes another step further, which does even better at keeping wort from and scorching. It keeps the kettles cleaner, and you're getting less browning and less Maillard products. So when you want to keep a beer nice and light and fresh tasting, it helps a lot that way. And it's the being gentle, as you were talking about. And yeah.
Speaking of Maillard contribution, you don't decoct.
It's true.
You're a hardcore fanatic lager brewer, but decoction is not a part of what you do here.
That is correct. We have dabbled a little bit in it, and we will dabble more in the future. But a lot of it is for me is the malt that is generally available and I'm generally using German malt.
Yeah.
And we know there's really 2 main suppliers, and we know who they are. The Environments, I love Tomas and Sabina and Fanny. They're great folks and stuff. But also there's Best Malts, and I've come to really enjoy their service and products as well too. And also my really good friend is a sales rep for Country Malt Group, and so I've got a tight tie there locally, and that's Jeff Fisher. He's a great guy. I love that guy. Anyhow, so I use a lot of best malts, and I was expecting that I would be using Environment malt, but it was harder. Just where I'm at geographically, the shipping works out better this way, and I'd never used best malts, and so I liked it. And I experiment with malts all the time. I buy Ohio malts when I can here and there, and I was buying a lot more. Things have shifted around. A few suppliers have come and gone and changed, but I still do get some malts from Ohio a little bit because I want to support local malting, because I do think Ohio has the potential to produce some great lager malt at some point, and I think it's slowly coming along, and I like to get that feedback to them. But also the beers that my beers are so malt centered that, I mean, I've brewed with all the pilsners that I think are really, really relevant. If there's so many rattling in my brain right now, but the ones that ultimately in the end that really do a good job at making the beers I like are basically Environment and best malts.
Yeah.
And yeah. And
so you can get the flavor that you want though without that whole decoction process.
Exactly. And it's just that I personally feel that, I mean, these malts they're well modified. They're very well modified. They're extremely modified. And I feel like doing a decoction with an extremely well modified malt, I'm not trying to create any arguments or anything. I feel like it's not only not benefiting the beer, I feel like it's actually potentially being a detriment. I feel like it's almost certainly not going to benefit head retention and a lot of that protein, because you're going to be breaking that down like a lot more. And there's a potential of, maybe some other astringent things or other things going on. And I have good water. I don't have perfect water, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And so for me, this Holtkurtz type mash regime, step mashing that I do, does all the things that I want. And with that, I've been so happy with that. I just have not felt like I need to dive headlong into decoction and chasing that potential theoretical dream that might do something better. And just in my experiences at other breweries and talking with other brewers and stuff, that with this malt, I'm just not going to be able. But if I'm getting my hands on some like really amazing, like slightly less modified or significantly less modified malt, that would be rad. I'd be all about that. But also I need to get to learn that malt and then modify my process a bit more and stuff. And
Sure. Well, you just mentioned Holtkurtz mash, hot and fast. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we mash in, I'll speak in Fahrenheit just because it's a little bit easier for me.
Oh, can you translate this in your head?
I can.
Okay.
But sometimes I might be a few degrees off here and there.
Yeah.
But I mean, so we're mashing in generally in the mid upper 140s. So, we're talking maybe like 63C or something, but or a little bit less than that. And then we're letting it sit for 20 to 30 minutes, depending on, what we're trying to achieve. And then we step up again to maybe, around 154, 155, sometimes a little bit higher, maybe as much as like 158, and let that again rest a little bit. And so that whole mash step process for us takes a little over an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, which is a little bit, it probably doesn't need to be that long for a lot of it. But it does do a good job for what we're doing. We like the results with it.
What is that result that you're looking for with that mash?
The
right level of attenuation that works with the yeast that you have in order to produce this balanced, drinkable beer.
Correct. Yeah. And so 99% of the beer we produce is fermented with one yeast, and it's a lager strain, and it's Augustiner from Augustiner. And I get it from BSI, Brewing Science Institute, because again, one of my good friends, and actually a few of my good friends are there, David Bryant and Brian Pearson. And, I've been along on yeast collection trips in Bavaria with those guys. And, the year before one of my trips, David had brought back that yeast from Augustiner, and I've used it from different suppliers with varying degrees of success. And I feel like I get the best success for the way I'm brewing with Augustiner from them. So I'll just say that works well for me.
And you might have happened to be there on the trip when he got that strain from Augustiner.
I was not, memory is so hard. I'm not sure I was on that. I think he got it the year before.
Okay.
But I was with him the year I was there.
Sure.
He collected the one from Ondex.
Okay.
And so that's the Costa Brauerei Ondex, the monastery brewery up off of outside Hersching off of the Ammersee. And that's that yeast he got it in a water bottle and we brought it back and that's what I do when I say 98%, just because I do in the summertime and I try to do it more. It's just a pain in my butt, but I do some Hefeweizen and I do some Weiss beers. And so that is the strain I'm using is from Ondex. And I love it. But it's also, that's a whole nother mash process that's like, that we can talk about now or some other time, but that's way more involved and super cool and geeky. But and I'm forgetting the name of it right now. But
let's talk about what you enjoy about what that yeast does for the lagers and the kind of intention and the flavor that you are trying to achieve with that, and then how that works again, not only with your water but also the hops that you use in that. Let's talk about how all of those things work together. But first, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroir, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling, thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropic strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off your first order. So what is it about that Augustiner yeast that gives you the beer that you want to make here at Woolly Pig?
Well, so
because there are definitely plenty, I mean, obviously predominant strains like 3470 that a lot of American lager brewers lean on for their nice, clean Munich style lagers.
And the sub strains of 3470. Yeah.
The sub strains.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, on this one trip, I kind of referenced that we were doing some yeast collection and visiting breweries in the greater Munich area. And I think this is like 2007, I think. Anyhow, it was a good trip. I was there like with Bill I and Steve Hawley and David Bryant and stuff. And we were and Bill Hassa and we were running around and one of the tours we had on that trip was Augustiner, where they collected the yeast the year before. And at Augustiner, we got a tour with at the time the head technical brewmaster, and we got to see all the operations of brewing, as well as the cellaring, as well as the they were not malting, but we did get to see the underground maltings at the brewery off the Brukerstrasse, Hackebrücke, I think is. Anyways, that's their production facility out there in the Munich area. And you glean lots of little tidbits of information, like what temperature they're fermenting and how they're treating their yeast and how they do different things. And Augustiner is obviously a very well respected brewery in the Munich area. It's and the beer is great, and I think there's a lot of ways to brew with it. And for me, I had been brewing with it at Uinta. I had transitioned us away from a Danish strain to this strain when I was there, and I really enjoyed the results, and I started to understand it even more. And then coming here, I was able to really, I can ferment exactly the temperature I want, which is, Augustiner likes a warmer fermentation. So it's going to be, at the coldest, I'm fermenting at 53 or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. And otherwise, I'm fermenting up as high as 57 or 58 degrees Fahrenheit. And so my fermentations tend to be relatively quick. They're about 7 to 8 or 9 days. And they're very... They're pretty robust and they're clean, and the thing is that I get a beer that comes off of that without even lagering, it's already in a fantastic shape. It's got low sulfur, low VDK diacetyl, and it's already doing really well. And I think that also comes to, make sure you're pitching well and taking care of your yeast properly and not letting it get out of hand in that regard as well. And then, but as far as the character, it contributes a nice malt balance that is not overly intense. And it just is, part of me is, it's the process. The process of how this yeast works in my brewery allows me to... It works so well. I just can't even say enough for it. Like it allows me to keep things moving quickly. I'm not too hung up on these super cold fermentations that are taking a really long time. They're potentially kind of stressful. That might be having trouble with with some sulfur production and stuff like this. It allows me, if I do everything the way that I know how I should treat everything, I'm getting I'm getting clean lagers that are ready pretty quick. But in this case, they do go to lagering from there, and sometimes double lagering, which is not really it's not a thing. I'm not trying to say I'm double lagering, but I kind of am sometimes. But yeah.
Double lagering. So you mean with some of the beers, you'll just transfer them to a new lager tank and continue lagering them from there?
Yeah. So we serve off our lagering tanks, right? So for most of our beers, they go through fermentation, then they go straight from the fermenter to a lagering tank, and they'll be there for 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll be tapping them, serving them. I mean, it's just it's
this
true,
beautiful grid of 12 they're 5-barrel lagering tanks.
10 barrel.
Oh, 10 barrels. Okay.
Yeah. Because our fermentation batches are generally 10 barrel batches.
Okay.
We double batch off the 5-barrel brew house, right? So.
So they're long, but actually relatively narrow.
Super narrow, yeah.
10-barrel lagering tanks stacked. 3 wide, 4 high,
or 3 wide, 3 high in that one.
Oh, okay.
Because I got 2, yeah. Because it's like a grid of 9, and then there's another 3 in the other tank or the other cold room.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, and that lagering, I mean, those tanks, it's like you said, they're long and they're skinny, and so the beer column is really short. I mean, we're talking 30 inches. And so, having gravity act on whatever might be in there, it allows stuff to drop out pretty quickly. So the beers can clarify relatively well, relatively quickly. So we're not getting a super yeasty beer, and that's what allows us. And that's, I do like to drink lagers along. It's fun for me along the process is we put our Keller Pils on, or our Rustic Helles or Schwarzbier or Rye Dunkel or something, and it's it might be a little bit yeastier and a little bit younger, right when we put it on, and it's only been lagering for 3 weeks, but then that batch will be on for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And, it will continue to clarify as that process goes on. And so, that's really nice. But sometimes what we do is since we have another cold room that has more lagering tanks in it, this also allows us to get ahead in summertime too, is we can get beers in there and they can get started lagering, and then I can bring them over and then have them there for a few days or a week, and then tap them and put them on tap in the tasting room. So, yeah.
So really, your double lagering is prepping for busy season.
Pretty much. But now we like it so much that if we can, we try to do it more for a few of our beers. But it's a newer thing. Like I said, I didn't have those extra tanks until this year. But yeah.
So as I think about that, having that kind of long and skinny lagering tank, obviously you're right. Your beer column, things settle out faster, but now you've got a bigger layer across the bottom potentially, and could that leads to getting down to a point where you don't want to serve it potentially a little bit faster.
Totally, yeah. And so we try to get our beers moved through pretty quickly. And then also I have some what I call serving tanks. I've only got 4 of them, but so. And this whole rotation is when we get down, when the tanks are about half full, then we try to empty them off of that yeast. So we're trying not to have them be on the yeast too long.
Right.
And that is a big part of the process as well. And that's also the double lagering kind of helps us manipulate that. It's, it gets complicated, but that's only because if it was a perfect rule, I'd have 30 tanks and I could just do whatever I wanted. But I don't have space for that, and I don't have the resources.
Well,
Here comes Brian Powell with the manure again, so it's a little loud.
But it's interesting here on the farm to think about that process of brewing and serving are intertwined. That because the serving it here at the farm is the primary way that, or buying bottles to go for that matter, the primary way that people enjoy your beer. You can wrap those two things together, and the process of beer making isn't necessarily just done once you start serving it. You're now still thinking about the life of that beer over the.
For sure. Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the specific beers and some of the now that we know the kind of broad parameters around that. As you think about say brewing a pils, how does your recipe design brain think about making a pils within the scope of the system that you've set up to make lager in general?
For sure. So I've like I said, I've brewed a lot of different pilsner malts. And there's some really good ones, some excellent ones. And again, the ones that I really enjoy just so happen to come from Germany. But one of the things with Pilsner malt for me is I don't like, partly because our system is so gentle and we have such low thermal stress and thermal influence in the boiling and heating processes that we've got. I can use a Pilsner malt that is potentially has a slightly darker color, but it's not going to pick up as much color in the process, right? And so I tend to like a Pilsner that has a higher SRM and that is slightly more kilned, just because I think it processes better. I think you get these malts that are super under kilned. You're talking like these things are like 1.3 to 1.5 or 6 SRM, and I don't think they louder as well. I think that you tend to have more potential DMS or other grassy flavors and stuff that are going to not necessarily be stripped out in the boiling processes. And I'm just not a fan of those malts as much. So like
you are not on Team Ultra Crispy then.
No, but that's okay. It's okay. It's cool.
That is cool.
And so
it kind of fits into your Bamberg, Franconia, kind of inspiration too, where those are definitely those lagers are not as light and clean and crisp necessarily as those Munich lagers further south.
Totally, yeah, and so for me, so the SRM of like the Pilsner I'm using from Best Malts is like 2. It's 1.8 to maybe as high as 2.2. And I'm experimenting a little bit with the Danish malt that we just got in recently, and that's been pretty fun as well. And that's a little bit higher. That's even like 2.4. And I love Vienna malt too. And so like the Best Malts Vienna malt is something that makes its way into a lot of our beers. And like our fest beer this year was actually 100% Vienna malt, except for a very small percent of acidulated malt as well, which we use in almost all of our brews as well. So when I say it's like 100% Pilsner malt, it's like, I'm at like 97% Pilsner and 3% acidulated, but I don't call out the acidulated all the time.
You're not a Reinheitsgebot guy, are you?
I am a Reinheitsgebot guy in spirits. I have hang-ups with Reinheitsgebot, but that's
all right.
I think that
little acidulated malt signifier that just okay.
Yeah, part of it is that I'll just my small tangent Reinheitsgebot. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like when I was traveling there earlier and working with local brewing engineers and brewers in Germany and stuff, and being like, they're like, oh, we made this amazing Hefeweizen, and then we want to add some like Alpen Erdbeer, like some strawberries that are harvested from the Alps, and you're like, oh, that's amazing. It's like, but if we do it, we can't call it beer, and you're like, oh, that sucks. And at that time too, this is before they changed it, where it's like if you were adding any hops cold side, you also couldn't sell it as beer. And this is like I think it was 2013, 12 or 13 when they made that. They found some documents, and they were like, oh yeah, and there was some evidence that in the 1400s they were doing this and it was acceptable. And I had seen breweries. The thing is Reinheitsgebot also wasn't even a thing until the 1970s. It was like, brewers didn't even know it existed hardly. Like if you talk to brewers in the 1950s or 60s, they were like, what? I mean, they knew about it, but there was no control. It became just a giant marketing tool and political thing. And anyways, but I mean, yeah, then also like you get into clarification, right? They're like, oh yeah, you can dump all kinds of polyvinyl polypyrrolidone in there, and then you kind of filter it, settles out. It's good. I mean, it's powdered vinyl, which is fine. I mean, sometimes I've used it. We use it. It leaves the beer. I think, I don't know, but like you open that container, it like fills the whole room and it coats all my skin and all that hydrogen bonding everywhere. It's crazy. But anyhow, so I think that there's been some misconstruences in Reinheitsgebot, but I think that if you're following it following it to the letter of the law, there's some weird things. Versus if you're doing it, I think is the spirit of it is a better thing. But that no one can like sign on to that. They're like, whatever, dude.
So more color Pilsner malt. That's what we were talking about.
Sorry, yeah.
No,
more color
okay.
Pilsner. Yeah. So the more color Pilsner, that's the base of a lot of it. And like I said, I'm getting less color pickup and less flavor pickup in my brewing process because it's like we talked about earlier. It's gentle and working out pretty well. And so then I get some nice malt flavor that comes through, and I'm not getting these grassy notes or these. I tend to also not have problems with DMS and other things like that. Partly, well, not that that's necessarily tied into it, but it could be. Part of me for a lot of it is like these earthy, grassy notes that I feel like I tend to get in these ultralight beers that I'm just less a fan of. Yeah.
That's fair. And so, then talk to me about hopping.
So hopping, like, we pretty much use 2 hops for 90% of our beers. And so it's
efficient.
It's tradition from the Hallertau. And it's Saphir from Tettnang, and that's most of what we're doing. I've got a little bit of Galaxy and Simcoe and a couple Ohio-grown hops that we use for a few things here and there. Like we have I feel like old man, but I'm like, we have an IPL, Indy Pale Lager. This is just what I've had. It's a lager that's hoppy, that's brewed with a lot of Simcoe and Galaxy, and it's dry hopped a couple of times, and it's quite hoppy, but it's not like, it's not an IPA. It's not a West Coast. It's kind of the West Coast maybe a little bit, but it's more tropical, and it's kind of a shout out a little bit to, when I was brewing a hop notch and stuff. So hopping, for our Helles, we have a very small hop addition, light, so we're getting minimal, bitter pickup at the beginning of boil, and then at the end of boil, we have a modest addition, and that's it for like the Helles. For Pilsner, again, it's pretty modest for the beginning, and then we have a much larger addition, a pretty massive one. And I actually, in that case, like I said, I don't have a whirlpool, but in this case, I have to use what we call our hop stick. And it's basically has a little stand pipe on the end, and I can stick it down there in my kettle. And so for when I get to my lower drain, it works a little bit better for me. So, that's semi-modified process for that. But and then we don't dry hop our Pilsner. It's just we have a lot of hop addition in that late part of the kettle, and that seems to do really well for us. We have experimented a little bit with adding some dry hopping right at the beginning of fermentation in the first hour or so, just to see how that affects clarity in some of our beers, because that's a theory that's been bounced around a little bit more. It seems pretty valid, but I don't know if it necessarily works across with all yeast strains. So here I've got different things going on that may or may not have and it seems to be beneficial, but
a little faster clarification.
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Verdict's not quite out yet.
Yeah.
Still needs more research.
Yeah, but there's also trade-offs. I think you're getting some other flavors there that are not necessarily benefiting my core lagers. So this is something I'll do in our beers that are a little more experimental.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
What is it about the Saphir and tradition that speak to you?
Well, tradition, is I was also a fan of you mentioned earlier Sterling and Crystal, especially Sterling. I feel like it's pretty fabulous as well, but a little too big for me sometimes. And tradition, I just feel like is supremely well. It's just well balanced, and it lends a nice, a hoppiness in a way that's it's so noble and classic to me. but I feel like I get a lot of variety in saws sometimes, just as far as how it's harvested, when different crop years, and I think the agronomics of tradition are pretty fabulous. And I think I prefer to brew with hops that have good agronomics because they're more consistent. I feel like year to year, it's not as wild. And, as far as I'm a small brewer, it's not easy for me to go in and do hop selection and get exactly what I want. But I will say that I'm getting these from a much larger brewer that helps me out. Wink, wink, Will. Thanks, Joanna. Yeah. But so I know a little bit of what's going on there from that side. I'm getting them from a kind of a bigger supply stream, and I know that stream, and so it works for me. So I have a lot of faith in it, and I also have a lot of consistency with it that otherwise, if I was just calling up and saying, "Hey, I'm going to get my tradition from Country Malt Group," which would probably be great, but I'm saying it's just not going to be. I know what I'm getting this way. And then Saphir, I know Eric Toft a little bit at Schönraum in Bavaria, and he also helped develop Saphir, and I have always enjoyed what it's offered. This subtle, almost tutti frutti, tropical, not really tropical, just like a little bit of this nice, really bright, more than floral, a little bit fruity, and you can go over the top. And if you go over the top, it's just kind of fun. It's not like a problem. But then that with the tradition, I can basically form what I want in my Pilsner. And, but the Helles is just tradition. That's all it is. It's just, two hop additions for the tradition in the kettle. And then that's done.
But that, I guess the two of those in a kind of dynamic tension, and some of the others gives you more kind of, wouldn't say, not necessarily creative, but just there's some kind of modernity to classic kind of,
totally. Yeah.
Levers that you can or dial that you can turn a little bit.
Exactly. And if I was to throw an oven, there would be a Spalter Select. I just don't have a good supply stream for that. So I dabble in it sometimes, but if I found the person that could really hook me up, someone out there wants to help me out, it'd be great. But yeah.
Sure. So, what other lagers figure into the lager program here at Woolly Pig? And are there any in there that you've really learned something from brewing over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, so our number one selling beer is Helles. Although this last week our number one selling beer was Bock, because we did our Bock beer on stick and Bierstocken. So this will be a slight diversion onto that, because the Bierstocken is taking a hot iron poker and putting it in, which I learned from the brewmaster and family heir at Rittmeyer, which is kind of a brewery that I think just celebrated its 600-year anniversary in the last year or two. But I was there for Braubevial years ago, and he showed us Bierstocken, but it was just, he had a little stand with a propane torch and an iron, and we did their Weizenbock, and it was cool. It was novel and it's fun, but we do it here on a pretty large scale, where I think on Saturday I stockled, that's not really a word, but I kind of did a German English thing there, and I don't know, 200 or 300 Bock beers. And so the fire pit that's just behind me there, we have a whole bunch of these irons that are made by my father-in-law and brother-in-law, because they're blacksmiths, and their shop's just there's one property over where my wife grew up, and we make a bunch of them. We sell some of them, and then but we use them, and as I have lots of irons in the fire, 12 irons in there. And so anyways, Bock beer is really
literal
popular.
Irons in the fire.
Little irons in the fire. So, and we also serve it from our Holzfass that we have from Germany too. So we're pouring the beer out of the Holzfass and then stockling it and either hanging outside. It's pretty cool.
Sure.
But so right now, Bock beer is very popular for us. But Helles is we sell 50% more Helles than anything else probably. And then it used to be Schwarzbier was number 2, but now it's number 3. And then Keller Pils is number 2 for us. So those are 3 core beers. And then right in behind that, we have like our India Pale Lager, which is kind of our answer to if people want IPAs and hoppiness and stuff.
Someone wants some hops, you've got the beer for them.
Yeah, and it's nice too. So, and then like we do a dunkel. I do a dunkel and a rye dunkel, and I prefer the rye dunkel, which is about 15 to 18%, 15 to 20% rye malt.
Huh.
And
Why?
Mentally, I prefer dunkel, but when I brew rye dunkel, I like it more. And so it's just I think it's just that, we talk about the spice of rye, which is so, I think, misconstrued and subtle, but it is something of that capacity. And I think it helps break up the maltiness that you have in like the saturated maltiness that can be in a dunkel, which I don't really have that much of a problem with, but there is some of it there. And it just works well. I think it might be ultimately kind of like with our water and everything else, it just works out nicely. And so I brew them both, and we kind of bounce back and forth. I probably brew the rye dunkel 3 times every time I brew the dunkel, just because, and that's become one of our really popular ones that we sell as well. But we have generally about 10 to 12 beers on tap, 5 or 6 of them rotate, and we actually do a sour beer. We make a goza, so we make what we call a fruited goza. That's just as cranberry and hibiscus. This is also totally not what I'm asking about, but and ginger, but it pours pink with pink foam, and it's tart, not super sour. We're in a kind of the wine area of the Appalachian foothills here, so we get a lot of wine drinkers, and so they come in and they just are scared of beer, and they see that and they're like, okay, I'll have that, and then usually they're drinking Helles and other stuff too. So, but that's a big popular beer for us as well. But I ferment that with lager yeast because also I feel like gozas may have been fermented with lager yeast. We don't know, or at least I don't know, but.
Sure. You just talked about your water again, and that reminded me that we hadn't really talked. Earlier you mentioned you have good water, but not perfect water. Mm-hmm. Yeah, talk to me about and then you aren't pulling it off. That you have to provide your own water.
Yeah. So behind us is this big barn. It's all hand-hewn timbers built in the 1860s. It's pretty cool. Right next to it is a small cinder block building that was the milk house. It was put in the 1970s, and so. That was to meet USDA requirements and stuff. And right behind it, when that was put in, was also a shallow well. So it's only about 80, 90 feet deep. Then adjacent to that is kind of the farmhouse, and there's a well behind that that's a very old well. It's not even registered. So I should probably work on trying to do that, because all wells should be registered. But it's been there for so long and so old. But it's a very deep well. It's like 300 feet. And then we also have multiple springs on the farm. So this is kind of a weird, crazy thing, because I've got a productive spring that feeds a pond between kind of this barn and the farmhouse, and then I've got another spring up the hill that actually feeds a couple other houses, and then we have another spring that's over there that used to feed our neighbors up there, and then there's a spring up there that used to feed that neighbor, and so we've got 4 or 5 productive springs on the farm and 2 productive wells, and the water's different in all of them. And so people get all excited about spring water and stuff. Spring water is really cool, but it's a hole in the ground and water comes out just like a well. So I'm not to knock it. I'm just saying that I went around and I felt like a European immigrant, and I was just tasting these waters and trying to assess can I get enough volume out of it to use it as for my production and operations and stuff like that. And the water I thought had the best organoleptic, just the best sensory qualities, was this shallow well that was put in behind the milk house. And then, the water that comes, the deep well, that's terrible. It's all got iron, and it's nasty and ultra hard and terrible. And then the water then some of the other ones, it's some of them are higher in calcium and they almost taste chalky, and others have a little bit of iron, and others are pretty neutral and good. So it's interesting.
It's amazing what a difference a couple 100 yards can make.
It's ridiculous. I never would have thought that. And I've been, I have tons of friends who are geologists, and I would love for them to just answer me exactly, but no one can. It's fine. It's great. But so this water has a lot of character, and so that's where I'll get a little philosophical and stuff. And I am not, RO water is an important way to achieve the water chemistry that a lot of breweries need for especially lager beers and such. If I can avoid using it, I do. It's also a huge water consumer. So here it's if I do put it in, it's going to consume a lot more water. It's also why, and when we pour beer, I don't rinse my glasses with water, because it's more water I'm wasting. And I feel like it's going to be okay. The beer, we'll look at it. The beer glass looks clean. We'll fill it. But I think rinsing the glass beforehand like that, it's a fantastic process. I think RO is a fantastic process. But if I can get away without using it, I will. And so our water it's interesting. And one of the most unique characteristics is it has a low pH. It's about 5. It's about 6.25 to 6.3. And I'm going to get into it a little bit here. So so it has fairly high calcium content. It has a notable amount of sulfate as well. And then there's some other, the magnesium's nothing. It's there. It's not notable or anything. And the residual alkalinity is a little bit higher, but not anything that's going to make me lose some sleep overnight. Versus that really hard well, the residual the alkalinity is like out through the roof, basically. But so this water, when I went to do my first water brew before I brewed, I was just water going through everything, and all of a sudden my pH went from 6.3 to like 8.3, and I was like, oh no, I must have a leak in the steam jacket or something. I mean, because normally when you heat and boil water, the pH goes down. In this case, when you heat this water, depending on how you heat it up, it will increase a little bit or a lot. And so I learned a lot about how, the temperature differential between the heating surface and the water within, will affect how much the pH changes. Ultimately, it'll change quite a bit, but it doesn't have a lot. What it's basically creating is, we think, is calcium. That we have, basically we're releasing free hydroxide. So we think we have like a calcium hydroxide thing that is then releasing a hydroxide. So you end up with a little more calcium, but that free hydroxide radical is just like popping that pH really high, but with just a small amount of lactic acid, that comes right back down. So it's not like you have this residual alkalinity that you can't deal with. It's the bicarbonates aren't super high and everything, so it's pretty soft water. It drinks really well. I mean, you can just drink it and you're like, that's good water. I like that water. So it's water with character. It's not say that RO water doesn't have character, but this is water and you're drinking hot water, which has some other things, but it's basically the same water. But that character is, this is where it's more philosophical for me, is that's kind of where we are. That's what we are here. And I think that character, not that I necessarily even know how I'm modifying everything to accommodate that character, but I do change things a fair bit here and there. Sometimes theoretically, sometimes it's just in response saying, I don't like that, I want to change it. And it's almost like a piece of wood. This is silly, but like we have a lot of wood that we process here on the farm. It's everywhere in our tap room and our production facility, and I mean our tanks are clad in it, and you can tell it's everywhere, right? And you want like a perfect clean piece of wood. You look at it like, oh, that'll allow me to like make whatever I want out of it. It's going to stay together nicely. It's going to have perfect grain and perfect color. But then when it's all done, it's kind of uniform and kind of boring. Versus, I mean, you can have stuff that's really rough. You're like, man, that looks super cool. And then you build something out of it and you're like, that's junk. Right. So there's a balance where I think that you can have some of these flaws that don't necessarily detract from the quality of, in this case, the wood or in this case, the beer, but can actually bring to light some of the differences. It gives it figure, it gives it shape, it gives it character. I think true character. And
without negatively impacting its structural integrity.
Totally. And it can, but you got to keep an eye out for that. And so my water's, that's why I say it's not perfect, but it's doing great work for what I'm doing. And I enjoy it more than if I was just running a big RO system and trying to make it all happen. So
Sure. Well, before we finish up here, I've got to give you some time to talk about wastewater and that kind of approach to sustainability, because I promised you that I would. So share with us your some of your approaches on this. Obviously, again, not the sexiest of subjects here for brewing, but one that every brewer out there deals with generally on a daily basis. Yeah.
And I won't get too deep into it, but the big thing is that I just want to summarize like what really I want to focus on what we're side streaming, right? And so one thing that we're side streaming is all of our so obviously the spent grain that goes to the pigs, and it's nice because there's little transit time. So it's not like a farmer's got to drive a giant truck 50 miles and load it up and drive it back and dump it. It's we have our tractors got to drive like 50 to 400 feet to get it to the pigs. or we just, carry buckets over. So we're doing this spent grain, but if you go through the brewing process, there's lots of areas of collection. So the first step is the spent grain. Then after that, there's kind of the last drippings that are coming off the bottom of the lauter tun. We collect those. Then the rinse out from under the lauter screens, we collect that. And then from the wort boiling process, we have lots of, all the vegetative matter from the hops, but also the coagulate proteins. We collect that into buckets. Then the fermentation, whatever, green beer and yeast is left that we're not repitching and obviously transferring to age in lagering tanks, we collect that. And then in the lagering tanks, we actually have big scrapers that allow us to reach all the way back into them and scrape that, reach 9 or 10 feet back and scrape all that up and scoop it out. And we give that whatever drops out in the lagering tanks. And then even in our tasting room,
pigs eat all the yeast too, huh?
Yeah, and we're not treating it. It's just as is. And then
even with a little bit of alcohol in there, huh?
Well, that's the next step is
drunken pigs.
Yes, potentially, but we try to mix everything. So right. We have our liquid waste that's the drip trays underneath the faucets, and that goes to a manifold that's all connected to buckets that all goes to the pigs too. So we're not sending any of that down the drain, which is that's the biggest focus for us, is to minimize that the loading, the organic and the suspended solid loading that's going to our system. So that's what I want to say is side streaming. So there's a lot of buckets for us, and that's why I mentioned earlier, buckets are important for us, because we use buckets to transfer, but it works well for us because we're small. We're 600 barrels a year generally, and so it works on that scale.
In the same way that your neighbors can drive a tractor and put the animal manure on the pasture on the field next to us.
Totally.
You can do the same kind of thing with the output from your brewing stuff.
Exactly.
Here.
And then, we do collect some of that from the pigs and use that around as well too. And I want to just tip sideways away from wastewater and mention just some other sustainability things that we do that are small. So I try to talk to smaller brewers a lot about what can we do that some larger brewers do, that you really get systems like CIP systems, or just, kind of temperature control areas that where bigger breweries say, oh, well, big breweries can do that because it's like they can afford these systems that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, it's like, for one thing is there's a lot of hot air in the brewing production area in the brew house. So we have our brew house separated physically with a glass wall from our cellar. So the brew house, right now might be 80 or 90 degrees, but then in the cellar, it's about 55 to 60 degrees. And then adjacent and within the cellar, we have our 2 cold rooms, and those are going to be, right now they're at about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we have it all organized that way so that there's not a lot of heating and cooling hot air from the brew house is kind of wafting into the cellar, and then now it's like it takes extra energy to cool that and stuff. And then but one of the cool things is we have a little hole cut in the wall between the tasting room and the brew house, and that hole resides in the brew house between the hot liquor tank. It's high up on the wall between the hot liquor tank and the 2 kettles, and so we can blow that hot air directly in. But there's also a little heat exchanger between that fan and the louvers in the tasting room. And so at the end of the week, when we've got all of this hot water sitting in the kettle, we can just flip a switch and pump the water from the warm water, residual hot water that's just hanging out that would just waste away all weekend through that heat exchanger, and dump all that heat at 40 to 50,000 BTUs per hour for several hours into the tasting room. So we don't even have to turn on our mini splits to heat the space at that point. So
it's just free energy right there, and
just free that
keeps the tap room warm in the wintertime.
Totally. And then also we have a little $150 shell and tube 316 steel shell and tube heat exchanger that is hooked up to our steam, and I have 2 brinks, so we collect our CIP solutions, which for the most part is caustic and sometimes acid, and then we can reuse them. And so when we go to clean a tank, and so I did a little study on this to see how much I could reduce it. But anyways, we can have our water usage and energy use to be really minimal as far as, and our cleaning chemical usage as well, from this process of having a little tiny heat exchanger and a brink. And so for basically $500-600, if you're able to hook all that up, it works well. So That's why I try to let smaller brewers know that we can do some of the stuff the big guys do, and it doesn't cost a whole bunch, and we can save like tons of energy that way. And then also we're doing a gigantic solar array. It's gonna be like 100 kilowatt hour or 100 kilowatt. Like, I mean, it's gonna be a very large solar array that's going in this winter. That is also gonna be part of our process. So that's sustainability stuff. I just had to mention it because it's a big focus of what we do too.
Well, I love it too because out here on the farm, there's a bit of a self-sufficiency vibe, as we've heard you explain throughout this. The people that do the things, the family members that make the things, the neighbors that provide the things, and but that's the way that farm life has always been, right? You've always had to figure it out yourself, but also try to be as efficient as you can with the limited resources, while also making the best thing that you can possibly make.
And that's exactly it. To be silly, corny. It's like sustainability makes sense. It's like it does. Being efficient saves you money and saves you resources and makes less work if you do everything and think it through a little bit. So it is, I think, being sustainable is like, all right, that may be like a catchphrase, but really it's part of a process of just being efficient and a good steward to your space and your land here too as well.
Absolutely. So zooming out, big picture, what do the next 3 to 5 years look like for Woolly Pig? It's hard to look that far in the future. Obviously, you're making decisions day by day. It's a challenging beer environment out there, but you all have stayed small so that you can stay close to what you do and are still trying to, obviously if you're making a major investment in solar, then you must be in some sort of position to do that. So it sounds like, you have some optimism for the future around here. Yeah.
I mean, the grants from the FDA are pretty helpful. But yeah, no, it's still going to cost us a little bit on that anyhow. But yeah, 3 to 5 years. I mean, my grounding is my family and friends that help us operate the brewery. I mean, it's me, my wife, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, my other brother-in-law. It's a big family affair, and a couple of our really good friends that everyone works. It's fantastic. It should have driven me crazy, but they're such great people. It's been amazing, but they keep me grounded. I want to start reaching for things that are way out there that incur a lot of work and effort and stress and stuff. And so I've learned to really temper that. They let me do some projects here and there. But so honestly, we don't have major expansion projects. We're not going to be blowing the walls out and doubling capacity I have enough brewing capacity to do a little bit more, but we're not going to be distributing, and that's a big part of right now. That's not part of our plan, and also I don't really want to anyways, just with franchise law in the way it is in Ohio right now. It's a scary game to be in. I think we could do well in that pool, but it's also not a fun pool to be in sometimes, just from contract wise. Sure.
And then you start doing more work and you make more revenue, but you don't make any more profit just because now you're playing this game in this kind of way.
I'd have to sell 8 to 10 times the volume offsite just to match what we're doing. All that stuff. So, 3 to 5 years ago, I would like to have the barn here be, I wouldn't say an event space, but we're not planning on doing events, but it would be nice to have it be, to do a couple things here. We could host the annual Ohio Craft Brewers Association event, which sounds silly. It's why would you do it for that? I don't know. It'd be great. Maybe some local square dances and contra dances or something. But, and then the lower level would be nice for, it's tempered. It's a naturally cool environment in the summer and it's a naturally warm environment in the winter. So it'd be an area that we wouldn't have to really renovate heavily to make it into this climate controlled facility. And if I was going to do that, it would destroy the barn. I may as well just build a new building anyways. So in this case, we could probably get 3 seasons of use in that capacity. So that's something that will definitely be, because I need to work on the barn so it doesn't, I want to be a good steward of that barn that was built in 1860 so it doesn't disappear. It's an important resource, I think, for the community and for us. And I want to, it's beautiful. I don't want to lose it. So that's part of it too, is I got to work on that. And I need to build a little, since I do a lot of work and I need to build a little wood shop up there and stuff, because I just got to start replacing all my tabletops and benches and stuff. And so I need that. We built that barn. We have a new barn over here that we built that a couple of years ago, and anyways, we put in new bathrooms outside here a couple years before that. So it's small things around here. It's not like we're doing giant things.
You're harvesting your own lumber here, planing your own boards, building things out of the wood from your own property here. I mean, it's it's fun. It's a farm,
and it's good. And we have lots of local people that help us do some of that stuff too. So, yeah.
Well, Kevin, it's a super cool place out here, making super cool beer in a super cool way. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me here on the podcast. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew offers 2 to 4 week lead time on in-stock rotary can fillers and seamers. Old Orchard is your go-to source for fruit forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5 gives you juicy modern hop flavors without the haze. 5-Star Chemicals cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. And Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and help support us in our mission to bring you great brewing conversations with brewers all over the country, all over the world. Kevin, if people want to learn more about Woolly Pig, try your beer, experience this farm, and maybe even take home some pork chops or something from your Mangalitsa pigs here, where do they find you?
Well, we're in eastern central Ohio, Appalachian foothills. We're about 2 hours south of Cleveland, about an hour and 45 minutes west of Pittsburgh, an hour and 25 minutes east of Columbus. So we're kind of in this triangle of where there's not a lot going on, but we're in Coshocton County. And we're just off of US 36, which starts right out in your neck of the woods, and that's the beginning of 36, and it ends just beyond us here a little bit.
Really?
So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. That's the US 36 thing. So we're on US 36, and we're just only a few thousand feet. So if you're driving by and you're like, oh man, it seems so, I'm scared to go up the little road. It's not very far up the road, and it's not a bad road. So. We're just up the road off of 36.
Beautiful little spot out here. Thanks to Matt Cole from Fatheads for including you in his Pick 6 story for the issue of the magazine, which then spurred us on to ask more questions, look it up and learn more. And then, of course, ended up with me reaching out to you a couple days ago and saying, hey, I might be here. And I got roped in. I'm supposed to take him down the river sometime pretty soon here too and do some fishing. So that should be pretty good too. Amazing. And I'm sure you'll hear more about Woolly Pig in the pages of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine in the future because you've got all of us interested. Anyway, Kevin, great talking with you about brewing. Cheers. Thanks very much. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.